The first day of President Trump's impeachment trial has just come to a close, and we are joined here by one of the jurors to help us break it all down. This is Verdict with Ted Cruz. You may have noticed that I am not Ted Cruz. I am Michael Knowles. I am joined here by the man himself, Senator Cruz. Senator, busy day?
Pretty much business as usual.
It was a nice business as usual 13-hour day during the first full day of the impeachment trial. You know, we all know the arguments. We've been hearing about impeachment now since about 5 seconds after Trump got elected. Did anything change today during these debates?
You know, I don't think anyone's mind was changed. I think anyone who came in as a yes is still a yes. Anyone who came in as a no is still a no. I think that's true for the 100 senators, but I think that's also true for the people at home. I mean, we're sitting here right now. It is 2:42 in the morning.
Right. You've come here straight from the Hill to this studio to do a podcast. I'll ask you why maybe in a little bit, but you're coming right on the heels of this debate, and yet nobody's mind was really changed.
Well, we saw 11 motions from the Democrats, one after the other after the other. This was all a battle of pretrial motions. It's sort of the early battles in a trial. And the weird thing was those 11 motions, it was the same thing over and over again. Right. So I have to admit, I expected the first one and maybe even the second one. I didn't expect them to keep filing basically the same motion, keep making the same arguments over and over again. It was like Groundhog Day, except they'd get up and have a different House manager stand up and make the same damn arguments. And you saw, like the senators in the chamber, just their eyes glazing over. And I'll tell you, Michael, what was revealing. So when we started at 1 o'clock, the Senate gallery was packed. There were lots of reporters up there with the people sitting there. As it went on, within a few hours, the reporters had cleared out. Half the reporters were gone, and by 8, 9 o'clock at night, the gallery was empty. Like everyone had left and said, okay, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm bored out of my mind.
This is what I was wondering the whole time, because I wasn't really surprised by much of what was going on. We knew what to expect other than the time. What are they thinking? I mean, what is the end game here for these Democratic House impeachment managers?
Look, they're trying to drive a message, but I'm not sure what's gained by just droning on over and over and over again. What exactly that they thought was beneficial about talking at 1:30 in the morning?
Right.
Who was listening? And, you know, it was interesting also. I thought the House managers, look, I'll say at the beginning, I thought the first couple of hours, the House managers were doing a pretty good job. They sounded more reasonable. They sounded less partisan than they were during the House proceedings.
It was good political theater.
It was that there were some good moments. I'm sure MSNBC will be clipping little segments of it and saying, oh, this was powerful and wonderful. But then it got, number one, really redundant. But number two, it was striking to see, especially Adam Schiff and Nadler, just lecturing and condescending, not only to the senators but to the American people.
Right.
I mean, it was a harangue. By the end of it, it wasn't designed to convince.
Yes, and I want to ask you about the theatrical side of it, because it seems to me there are two theories on impeachment. And on the one hand, you've got guys like Alan Dershowitz, who are on the president's legal team and actually was a professor of yours in law school.
He taught me criminal law.
Well, what Professor Dershowitz has said is that there is a legal requirement for impeachment. So it's not just all political theater. There actually is a legal threshold you've got to meet for an impeachable offense. Then on the other hand, you've got guys like former President Gerald Ford, who said impeachment is pretty much whatever the Congress says it is, and high crimes and misdemeanors are however we want to define it at the time. You are not only a senator, you are a constitutional lawyer, one of the brightest legal minds in the country. Which is it? Is there a legal requirement for impeachment?
Look, there absolutely is. The Constitution specifies what's required for impeachment. And the framers, if you look at the standard, you can impeach a president for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. That's what the Constitution specifies. And if you get to the heart of the problem with the House Democrats' case here, it's that they haven't alleged treason,
Right.
bribery,
Right.
or other high crimes or misdemeanors. That their disagreement, we heard a lot of this today, is they just don't like the guy. They hate President Trump, in case anyone missed that point, and they disagree with him. They disagree with him on foreign policy. They disagree with him on politics. And you know what? They're entitled to have that view. That's the beautiful thing about our democratic process. But disagreeing with someone politically or on policy is not sufficient grounds to impeach them. You've got to demonstrate treason, which they haven't alleged. Mm-hmm. You've got to demonstrate bribery, which they haven't alleged, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And it's interesting, if you look at what is a high crime or misdemeanor? You can actually learn a lot from the history of the Constitution. When the Constitutional Convention began, the text of the Constitution just said treason or bribery. So those were the only two grounds. And then at the convention, George Mason, who's one of the more respected of the founding fathers, said, look, treason and bribery are too narrow. Mm-hmm. We need to be broader. So Mason proposed adding the word maladministration.
So you're just no good at governing. You're no good at your job of being president.
And he argued, look, there are circumstances we'd want to impeach a president that are broader, and so let's add this. And James Madison, who is often referred to as the father of the Constitution, he stood up and he disagreed. He said, look, maladministration would be a mistake. What it would mean is you would have a president impeached anytime the Senate disagrees with him.
Right.
Anytime there's a disagreement on policy or politics, they'd be impeached. And so it was Madison who proposed, instead of maladministration, other high crimes and misdemeanors. And that was, in turn, what was adopted in the Constitution.
This is why I want your historical perspective here as well, because we're joking about how absolutely tedious and boring these impeachment proceedings were. This is an historic event. This is the third time that we've done this in American history. We managed to make it almost 80 years in our country before we impeached a single president. Then we made it more than 100 years after that before threatening to impeach another president. Now we've impeached 2 out of the last 4. It seems like this is speeding up. It seems like we're getting into a situation where the Congress is just going to throw out presidents that they don't like. Are we doing this too much? Is this a bad sign for the country?
I think it's very dangerous. I think if the House Democrat standard this time, if that's what holds going forward, anytime you have a president of one party and a House of a different party, they're going to impeach him. We're just going to see this as a standard tool of political warfare. You look at the 2 articles of impeachment the House voted out. Neither one of them alleges a crime.
Right.
Like on their face, they don't allege any violation of criminal law. They don't allege any violation of civil law. Well, if you don't allege the law was broken, it's not a high crime or misdemeanor. And that, what was interesting about today, so this was all about whether to call additional witnesses. Now, look, the House had 17 witnesses. Mm-hmm. They only called prosecution witnesses. They didn't let the defense call witnesses. But getting here, House managers wanted to call a whole bunch more witnesses. They wanted to go on a fishing expedition.
Right.
And sort of
And why did they, by the way? Because they were trying to call, they called all these witnesses and they heard them out and then they took the impeachment vote. If they wanted more witnesses, why didn't they call them before the impeachment vote?
Because they haven't proven their case.
Right.
And they know they don't have the evidence. Rewind, go back a month or two. You may remember during the House proceedings, there was a time when suddenly all the House Democrats began talking about bribery. Mm-hmm. And actually news stories explained why they did it, which is the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, did focus grouping and polled it and discovered bribery is really bad. People don't like bribery. They're mad when their president's bribed. And just about every House Democrat, like flipping a switch, began saying bribery, bribery, bribery. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? Bribery is an impeachable offense. If you can prove bribery, you got him. But the articles of impeachment don't allege bribery.
They considered doing it, right, and then they pulled it back.
And that's their problem right now, is they heard this witness testimony, they heard all this evidence, and they can't prove their case. So what they want to do is they want to try to bring in as many witnesses as they can and go fishing, try to find something to back up their case. What the Senate ended up doing today is we adopted a procedural order, basically a way of proceeding. And it is very, very similar to what the Senate did in the Bill Clinton impeachment. Bill Clinton impeachment had two phases. Phase one was opening arguments and questions from senators. And there were no witnesses, there was no consideration of witnesses in phase one. And then after that, the Senate debated and fought about, should we have additional witnesses? They end up calling a few additional witnesses for depositions. So what we did today, what Senate Republicans did, is took an order very, very similar to the Clinton order. By the way, that order was approved 100-0. It was bipartisan. It was unanimous. Every Democrat, every Republican.
But, Senator, that was then. This is now. That was when it was a Democratic president. And now, obviously, and I say this somewhat jokingly, but there is a lot of hypocrisy that's going around between these two impeachments.
There is massive hypocrisy. Now, look, I will recognize hypocrisy is a problem on both sides of the aisle.
Sure.
It's not like Democrats have a monopoly on that. But it is striking the recency of the hypocrisy. You know,
Right.
There was one moment where Pat Cipollone, the president's White House counsel who led the defense team, he quoted from Jerry Nadler, who just a few months ago had said a partisan impeachment from just one country would never work. It would be bitter and divisive and rip the country apart.
If from just one party, if you had just one party pushing this, as the Democrats have in this impeachment.
And what's interesting is that wasn't Jerry Nadler talking during the Clinton impeachment, although he said that back then. That was him last year.
Right.
That was him trying to push back the far left in the Democratic Party, saying, no, we can't impeach this guy.
Right.
Because it can't be partisan. Unfortunately, that's where we are. And I think the way it's going to work going forward is we're going to have opening arguments. It's going to start with the House managers. They got 24 hours. Initially, by the way, our scheduling order provided for 2 days, 24 hours over 2 days. Right. The Democrats were screaming all day, 2 days is terrible. We can't possibly do it in 2 days. You guys are to cover up, trying to give us 24 hours.
It's not a trial, it's a cover-up.
By the way, the Bill Clinton impeachment order, 24 hours, exactly.
That's an inconvenient fact, but okay, sure.
So it's actually one of the things, actually, that Senate Republicans said, fine, we'll give you 3 days. So instead of 24 hours over 2 days, 12 hours a day, we'll give you 24 hours over 3 days, 8 hours a day. I really hope that doesn't mean that the next 3 days we're going to listen to 8 hours of them repeating the same arguments. You know, it was interesting today. This was supposed to be fighting over pretrial witnesses, but the Democrats basically gave their opening argument today.
Yes, and that actually was somewhat unexpected. But right out the bat, Adam Schiff seemed to be making the argument on impeachment, not on these questions of whether they're going to call John Bolton or some other relevant witness.
Well, and I think that's actually what House Democrats did most effectively today for the first several hours. Is they told their story. They treated this pretrial fight as an opening argument. They were talking to the American people. I thought the first couple of hours they were pretty effective, and then it just started they just started repeating it and getting angrier and angrier as the day went on. You know, as I look at the White House defense team, I think they've got some very talented lawyers. I think they made some good arguments today. But I also think they got too mired down in process. There was too much being lawyers and making lawyerly arguments. And what I hope we see in the days to come from the president's defense team is, number one, that they get more into the substantive arguments, not just the process, not just the minutia, but the fundamental substantive argument that this was not a high crime or misdemeanor, that it is always within a president's authority and a government's authority to investigate corruption. And I mean, to address the substance and also to tell a story. That's something, look, you could see that the Democrats are trial lawyers. They're telling stories not just to the 100 senators in the room, but to the folks at home watching. I think we need to do a better job telling a story as well, and it's especially needed because the president hasn't had a chance to tell his story. The whole House proceeding, they shut down the minority, didn't allow minority witnesses, so we need to tell the basic narrative. That's what the president needs to tell. I think that's what the Senate needs to tell is focus on the facts and substance, not a lot of rhetoric, not a lot of anger and emotion.
I want to ask you about a specific story that Congressman Adam Schiff, one of the House impeachment managers, was telling today, really because I think most people have no expertise on it at all, including myself. Adam Schiff seemed to suggest that there is pretty much no role for the judiciary in impeachment proceedings. He said, we got to get the courts out of it, we got to get the judges out of it. And I thought it was a very odd thing to say while Chief Justice John Roberts was presiding over the impeachment as per the Constitution. Did Schiff just get it wrong? I mean, what is the balance of power here?
So look, if you look at the role of impeachment, impeachment itself is a combination of the two branches. If you look in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton writes in the Federalist Papers about how the framers struggled with to whom to give trying impeachment. Mm-hmm. And they wanted a body that was independent. They wanted a body that had credibility. And they chose the Senate. They considered the Supreme Court. So they considered maybe we should have the Supreme Court try impeachment. They said, no, let's give it to the Senate, but let's make the Chief Justice preside. And so it was sort of a hybrid of the two.
Right.
If you look at privilege questions, so all of the debate about witnesses comes right down to privilege and executive privilege. Executive privilege is something every president has had. It's the ability to have your closest advisors, your national security advisor, give you candid advice without being hauled into Congress and put on national television.
Yeah.
Now, asserting privilege, look, we're all familiar with attorney-client privilege. Mm-hmm. You talk to your lawyer can't be brought in and put in the stand as a general matter to tell him to tell everyone what you said to your lawyer. There's spousal privilege. You know, you tell your wife or your husband something at night that they can't force your wife to come into court and testify against you. Now, there are exceptions to it, but privileges are commonplace, and courts routinely litigate privileges. Those are questions courts are used to considering. In this case, the House Democrats, frankly, I think are playing games. And the best way to understand it is look at John Bolton. A lot of the argument today was about John Bolton. John Bolton was National Security Advisor to the President. So House Democrats said, we want John Bolton to testify. And John Bolton did something very interesting and I think very clever. John Bolton's lawyer went to a federal court in D.C. and filed a pleading that said, Judge, my client has two conflicting obligations. House Democrats have asked him to come testify. But the White House has asserted executive privilege and said he can't testify. And John Bolton's lawyer said, look, my client doesn't know what to do, so, Your Honor, he'll do whatever you tell him to do. We put ourselves at the mercy of the court. You, judge, tell John Bolton what he should do. The next step is remarkable. You know what the House Democrats did? They said, never mind. They literally backed off. So there was another guy, Charles Cooperman, who was John Bolton's deputy, who they'd issued a subpoena for. They withdrew the subpoena from Cooperman, and they told the court, we're not going to subpoena John Bolton. Never mind. We're not going to call him as a witness. We're not going to subpoena him. We're not going to fight him. And then they get to the Senate, and the first thing they want to do is subpoena John Bolton. And they literally passed on it in the House. Contrast that to the impeachment of Richard Nixon. Now, Nixon ultimately resigned. But if you remember, there was a lot of litigation concerning Nixon, and you had a grand jury subpoena for the White House tapes. Remember, in the Oval Office, Nixon had a tape recording system.
Bad idea, but he did it.
Very
Didn't
bad
help him.
idea. By the way, as an aside, I don't understand all the people who have Alexa in their house. Like why exactly you want to bring a tape recorder into your home 24 hours a day?
We're just masochists, glutton for punishment.
You know, it really would be different if they renamed Alexa like Tricky Dick. People would be much more nervous about it. But okay, set that aside. In that case, the litigation went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court issued an order to the White House, hand over the tape. And it was, I think, 2 days later, Richard Nixon resigns.
Right.
That's actually the right way to do it. Look, if the House Democrats wanted to get John Bolton's testimony, they should have subpoenaed him, and they should have fought for it. And the claims of privilege are real. They're serious. You don't laugh about them and dismiss them. You fight about them and litigate them and resolve them, and that can be done relatively quickly, as we saw with Nixon. In this case, they're not interested in that. This is ultimately about a political attack on the president more than anything else.
Well, what I want to know is what lunch was like today in the Senate dining hall. But by that I mean, is the Senate taking this seriously, or does everyone's just made up their mind and they're dragging it out because, I don't know, you tell me.
Well, look, number one, when we have lunch in the Senate, we don't have lunch together. All
Really?
the Republicans have lunch together, all the Democrats. I mean, it's sort of like the Crips and the Bloods. I mean, it is, It is a much geekier, much older version of that.
Yeah, you're making the senator sound really cool. I don't know, very dangerous and very.
Brill cream is a really popular product. And that's true every day in the Senate. But the way it's working now during impeachment, we're starting every day at 1 p.m. Under the Senate rules. That's when the trial starts.
Right.
So the Republicans were having lunch, meeting 11:30 or noon each day. So we went and had lunch, and we're having a vigorous discussion about the upcoming trial. And it's actually so Mitch McConnell had drafted, I mentioned earlier, that each side would get 24 hours over 2 days, and the Democrats had been screaming that was a massive cover-up, and it was actually Republican senators who said, you know what, if they want an extra day, give them an extra day. Same 24 hours, but if they want 3 days instead of 2,
fine, let them have it.
It's not the end of the world. I thought that was I agreed with that. I thought that was a reasonable thing to do. And of course, it didn't stop the complaining at all. You give them what they want, and they still say it's a massive cover-up.
Right.
But that was most of the discussion actually at lunch today. Going forward, so we're going to have opening arguments from the House, 3 days. Opening arguments from the White House, 3 days, although I guarantee you they're not going to go 3 days. I think they will be much shorter than that. We've then got 16 hours of questions from senators. And the questions are a little bit weird. It's not going to be individual senators asking questions as much as I would love to cross-examine these House managers, and I promise you I would love to go at it.
I'm looking forward to it.
Senate rules don't allow it. So our questions have to be written. I got to write them down. And then the Chief Justice asks them. And it's 16 hours, and it alternates typically Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. So by the way, anyone listen to this, let me say, if you have a question that you think needs to be asked to the House managers or needs to be asked to the White House team, use Twitter. I'm at Ted Cruz. And just use the hashtag verdict. And we're going to be watching Twitter to get ideas from you.
I have to say, as absolutely tedious as the hearings were today, I was so excited to wait until 3 a.m. to come here because it is not possible to get
Michael,
closer.
you really need to get more.
I need a hobby. It's really not possible to get closer to this impeachment trial than you. I mean, than one of the jurors who's there, who is enduring all of these tedious arguments all the time, and who's seeing this truly historical event happen. What I want to ask you, though, is, you put in a 13-hour workday, not exactly probably the most pleasant day you've had in the Senate, and then you decide to come immediately here to this studio and do this podcast. What are you thinking? Why on earth are you doing that?
Look, substance matters. This is a time when our country is divided. Is angry. We see emotion, we see bitter anger. I think truth and substance matters. I think facts matter. I think the Constitution matters. And so this podcast, during impeachment, we're going to do it each night, coming and just talking about what happened that day.
We will be covering this every single night as the impeachment trial unfolds. And then, of course, there will be a whole lot more to talk about as well.
But on issues going forward, if you turn on cable TV, you get people in 5-6 minute snippets that are yelling at each other, that are engaged in just political rhetoric. We need to be talking the actual, when you ask me about high crimes and misdemeanors, I could just say, this isn't it. Why? Because my party is the one in the White House. Well, that's not the right answer. Let's actually talk about what the constitutional standard is. And that's true on issue after issue, whether it's free enterprise versus socialism, whether it's gun control versus the Second Amendment. Every issue, I think we need to engage more. We need to win people's hearts and minds. And so what I hope to do is have conversations really talking about issues that matter. And that's what this podcast is all about.
Right. They don't necessarily get a hearing on TV. Unfortunately, they often don't get much of a hearing in the Senate, but we're hoping to flesh that out here. And we'll be able to speak, of course, to all of the listeners. So definitely they should send those questions in. It would also be great, of course, if all of the listeners could subscribe to Verdict with Ted Cruz and leave a 5-star review. Unfortunately, I was just getting excited for us to get into the really important public policy matters like Mexit, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. We were going to touch on things that matter, but we've run out of time. And you need to get back to the Hill and get back to the Senate within, 3 or 4 hours or something like that.
It's to borrow 1 o'clock, presumably. We start with opening arguments, although I don't know if we will see House managers try to do more delay tactics. I hope not. I hope they actually dive into the merits. And I'm looking forward to the president's defense team having a chance to lay out the substantive merits. They need to get into that more. I think it's important for the American people to hear it.
And we haven't seen it yet, and maybe we'll see it tomorrow, and certainly whatever happens tomorrow, and all we can expect is the unexpected, we will be right back here breaking it down with as insider review as you can possibly get on the Senate, on the impeachment trial, and, of course, on the Constitution. Be sure to tune back tomorrow. I'm Michael Knowles. This is Verdict with Ted Cruz.